Yes, well, of course, that's when Uncle Norman moved in, and by that time Happy Hammond had moved out. But we can go way back, many years earlier, Simon, to 1956 in the illustrious television career of Ron Blaskett. Good evening, Ron.
Oh, good evening. It's Ron Blackshell here. And how lovely to be talking to you, Philip, and Simon, and your great unseen audience.
Well, of course, a milestone for you very recently was officially your last public performance at the Knox Club.
Yes, and oh, what a wonderful day it was. It was absolutely fabulous. I had Merle up there with me, and a lot of people hadn't known that she was the first female on Victorian transmission from Mount Dandenong. So it was great she was able to be there with me, but it was a wonderful day, and some people had left at 5 in the morning from Ballarat to come down and get a toy Jerry G. Jr. signed on the tummy. And they were such lovely people. I was glad that after the show I was able to spend time with them.
Ron, when you started all those years ago in the world of show business, did you ever think that it would be a lifelong career for you?
Yes, I did, because there was plenty of work pre-war. There were a group of professional freelance entertainers of very high standard, and you would get to know them because at weddings and all sorts of functions there would be 3 or 4 entertainers, and I got to know the best of them in those days. It was a very different scene because they could afford 3 or 4 good entertainers. One of them that comes to mind who made a wedding was Ted Nelson. Played accordion, was a great compere, and Lou Tapano was doing quite a bit. But the genius and types that you looked up to were the ones who were on radio. And thank goodness I got onto that through the help of Doug Elliott, and worked with Norman Banks on a show called Victory Varieties on KZ.
Okay, tell us about Mel Burko and Ginger. Were they competitors?
They weren't competitive because I was after their time. I was a lot younger than Mel, but they were fabulous on radio. But visually, Mel was not good. He had a shocking-looking doll, and he just talked. And they made the mistake of going on the Tivoli in a radio roundup, and it didn't do Mel any good. But on radio, he was magic, particularly when he worked with Terry Deer and Rolly Barley at one stage.
Okay. He got his start on 5AA, I think, and then came down here to 3AW for a while.
In Adelaide, sponsored by Supreme Boot Polish, and in Melbourne by Brian and May. And the redhead batches that you see would have had Ginger on had Mel stayed on the right track. Okay,
was Mel Burko at one time one of the Lee Murray players?
I wouldn't have thought so. Oh. Not that I knew of.
Lee Murray sort of had like a little drama group together.
Oh, I remember that. Mel wouldn't have been in those days. Okay. In those days, he used a falsetto voice for Ginger, and it gave a distinction for radio, and falsetto voices became the norm for a ventriloquist doll. Later on, of course, a more natural voice was the approach.
Well, your own Jerry G, did Jerry's voice change over the years, or was it...
No, Jerry G's was always right, but the figure I used prior to that, all through the war and on the Tivoli, had a falsetto voice. But that was Willie Ross. Jerry G was only flown out from Chicago for the opening of Channel 9 all those years ago. Okay,
another event I remember during the war years and after, because I'm a little younger than you, Ron Blaskett, not too much, was Kevin O'Gorman and his doll Archie.
Yes, there's a very interesting thing there. Kevin O'Gorman was a very good performer, and I saw him at the Palais at St Kilda doing a good spot. But after the war, he was doing daytime television, and one of the sponsors were aluminium slats that were just coming in. So he called his figure on the radio Ali Slats for aluminium slats. And I heard him work quite a lot with that, but he was a good performer. Yeah. Visually good, I mean, great.
You know, when you look back to the early days of Channel 9, I know Tony Lamond is still very much with us, but you're one of the few survivors from opening night.
From opening night, yes, but I suppose I am. But prior, I'm the only survivor, so far as I know, on camera from Mount Dandenong. And that was a great experience, and they couldn't get the cameras back very far, so you just had the wide shot. But Jeff Cook was the person I was with, and I used him as my straight man, and he did the test transmissions from there. A lot of people, when you ask in question time about who was the first person on television here in Melbourne, they say Bruce Gingell. But of course he was Sydney, and we only knew about that through publicity, not through actually seeing him. But it was Jeff Cork of happy memory who was the first in Victoria.
And you went on to give him the name King Corky.
King Corky later. After 4 years in 1960, when Happy Hammond left 9 and went to 7 because he was not under contract, I stayed, although I was offered the job there. And that was when we made Jeff Cork, who'd finished on IMT at that stage, Corky King of the Kids. But I'm very glad to hear that I'll get a royalty from that Uncle Norman song, which is one of the many that I wrote.
Oh, you wrote that song too?
Right, I did, yes.
Oh, and you wrote all the songs for the pantomimes too, I recall.
Yes, and the finishing Toodaloo Goodbye to You, which was used right in later years by Katrina Roundtree on that cartoon roundup.
Isn't that wonderful? Now, I presume Happy Hammond went across to 7. He was wooed over there by perhaps Norm Spencer, wasn't he?
Norm Spencer going there, but Keith Cairns was the actual wooer.
Yeah.
And at that time, I would have liked to have gone, but I had 2 years to run on contract.
Okay.
I should have gone and let them work it out, the legal side of it, which they probably would have done at great cost, because I was offered the job of producer, which I think Doug McKenzie was doing at that time, and I would have liked to have gone very much, but it wasn't possible. And Colin Benner was a very good persuader, and he persuaded me under a slight aside about legal side of staying on.
I'm really amazed to hear you say that. I thought you were Channel 9 through and through, with your loyalty and so on.
Well, you see, I'd worked with Happy, and Norm Spencer had meant so much to me, both from the test transmissions and giving me opening night, and then 5 nights a week plus adults in a quiz show on the Saturday night.
Yeah.
I felt a great loyalty to Norm Spencer, so it was natural that I wanted to go and keep the team of Happy and Jerry going, which was so successful. But it wasn't to be, and that's how life pans out sometimes.
Ron, were you and Norm in the army together?
No. Norm was not in Army Entertainment. I was in Jim Davidson's Army Entertainment, quartered at the Pagewood Film Studios in Sydney. There were 450 of us. We were broken up into various concert parties. My first one was with the Yarraroos, produced by Max Reddy, father of Helen Reddy, stepfather of Tony Lamont. So we had Smokey Dawson in that, Lou Tapano, orchestra led by Eddie Cordroy, and most of the ABC orchestra of military age. So it was a great show, very well produced and good lighting, portable stage. But after that 2 years, I got given my own show. We supported Gracie Fields and did the South Pacific tour, and I finished the war in Balikpapan in Borneo.
Am I right in thinking that Jerry G had his own TV show as well?
He had a special called, well, it was the Jerry G. Tarak show for quite a stage there, but he had a show called the Jerry G. Jamboree, in which we brought ventriloquists from all over Australia, including the wonderful Clifford Guest, who happened to be here at the Tivoli at the time, and it was compared by Eric Pearce and Jerry G. And it was a great show, but unfortunately no kinescopes or vision exists of it.
More to pity. Did you have an association with the Tivoli as well, Ron Blaskett?
Yes, after the war, it was the height of ambition to get onto the Tivoli, and I hadn't tried, but Jim Davidson, who then had got out of the army and became producer at the Tivoli, phoned me and asked me to appear in a show called Clambake.
Oh, yes.
So that was my association there.
You know, Simon will vouch for this. We get calls about two subjects on Nightline, more calls than any other subject. One is, whatever happened to Deadly Ernest? And we can always answer that question, and the guy's name is Ralph Baker, and he's still very much with us. The other question is all about the little man tapping on the window.
Oh, yes, what a great character. L.P. Alexander. I did ads for him on IMT every Friday night, latterly with Jack Little, who was a great fellow to work with, as you remember, Bill.
Yes.
And that little man tapping on the window became a Melbourne iconic figure, and they had to put a little extra piece of glass under where he tapped because he was starting to wear his way through the window.
Yeah, and you know, to this very day, he's still tapping on the window. I think of Haig's Chocolates in Block Arcade.
That's right. They found him on a rubbish tip in Sydney and got him restored. He was a beautifully made thing. And I worked in there at the Block Arcade when my book was launched, and there he was tapping away on the window, which was great. And again, I wrote that little song, Be Sure to Stop at L.P. Alexander's shop, with the little man taps on the window. And the
coincidence is that for many, many years, Norman Swain worked in a shop very nearby, in a lighting shop, also in the arcade.
I think.
Yeah, it's very close to the little man tapping on the window.
Yes, what a lovely fellow Norman Swain was.
Wasn't he? And before we take a break, I just want you to say something about Margot Sheridan.
You're right.
I'd like you to pay some tribute to Margot Sheridan, who I think is very underrated for her work nurturing Australian talent, not only on Channel 9, but at 3KZ in the P&A parade, for example.
Exactly.
Did you ever appear on the P&A parade?
No, I won Australia's Amateur Hour, compared originally by Dick Fair and Harry Durf, and then in my day, Terry Deer, friend Mansfield's uncle.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it was Australia's Amateur Hour that I won early in wartime before I went into service.
Do you remember whether that was in its time on 3AW? Because he did defect for a while to, I've forgotten which station.
3DB,
to DB,
yeah.
I think it was AW. It was done from the Princess Theatre, and I think it was AW. I'm not sure about that. I would have to look that up. But it was a wonderful thing, but you had to wait for a week to know if you'd won when the audience votes came in and were counted. We didn't have that electronic marvellous bit on the telephone.
And who was your doll in those days?
In those days, it was Willie Ross and Adolphus Twerk, who was modelled on Disney's Goofy Dog, a human version of that.
And of course, Adolphus became an important part of the Tarek show too, as I well know.
Oh, very much.
Don't forget, and Simon might know this, there were two amateur hours on radio in Melbourne, both from Sydney, one compared by Terry Deer, the other compared by Dick Fair, and they were on opposing stations, one on 3DB, one on 3AW.
Yes, well, I didn't know that because Dick Fair certainly did Australia's Amateur Hour, but the original was Harry Durf.
Yeah. We'll take a break, Ron, come back and talk to you. I want to ask you about the Graham Kennedy you knew after we take a break.
Happy show time with your friend, Cousin Roy. Lovely hands, funny face, Princess Panda, unfair, happy Alan.
Okay, well, of course, by then, Happy had moved across to Channel 7. As you told us, Ron, you stay put at Channel 9.
Yes, and I'd like to reprise, if I may, fill in, Simon, Margot Sheridan.
Oh, yeah, I want you.
Beg your pardon?
Yeah, I want you to pay a tribute to her.
Yes, well, when I was doing Victory Varieties with Norman Banks just prior to war service, Norman Banks was not a comfortable man for a kid to work with, and I was only a kid and had the greatest respect for him, but Margot Sheridan was wonderful to me at KZ, and it was her kindness and her encouragement that got me through there, and that's why I was very glad that we were able to use her so extensively at 9. But when the time came for her to go, she got sacked by telephone instead of a nice little boardroom cup of tea, which would have been so appreciated. So I was very glad that I was able to give her work at my shows accompanying me on the piano.
Why did she get the flick from Channel 9?
All the time it come that everything was being cut down then.
Oh.
So, not because of any lack of ability, but just purely everything was being cut right and left.
Sure. Did you find Norman Banks intimidating, perhaps?
Undoubtedly. But he was not expansive at all. In fact, he didn't have any conversations with me there, but I still respected him, and in later years I would have used him extensively if I could have as a talent. But as a kid, probably intimidating, but as I say, Margot made it livable for me.
Ron, I was just still thinking just before the break when we were discussing Australia's Amateur Hour, did you actually say that you got your start on there?
Got my start?
Yes.
No, I'd been going a long time before I got that opportunity.
Oh, okay.
And Doug Elliott of KZ had seen me and used me. He had a Saturday afternoon show, and it was through him that I got on Australia's Amateur Hour and won it without having to go through the audition process. So Doug Elliott was very kind to me.
Because that was the most listened to radio program, the Amateur Hour in its day on radio in the 50s with Terry Deer.
The Australia's Amateur Hour gave a wonderful boost to my career. Everyone knew you from then on. It was a very much discussed program, and I did particularly well with work after that. But just as I was doing very well, along came time for war service, so I had to go, and that was the 4 years of when you became a non-entity, as Normie Rowe did years ago later.
Yes, indeed. Now, apart from your talent at Channel 9 and being an all-rounder, as you were not only in the children's show but in IMT as well, you had a lot of influence behind the scenes with Colin Bednall and so on. Tell us about the Graham Kennedy you knew, and did you help to shape his career?
Well, Colin Bednall used to tell me a lot of inside stuff because he had been a war correspondent and I was a return man, so there was a natural affinity between us. And when Graham came in for a telethon, he was up in the control room and he and Norm Banks turned to each other and could see that he was the fellow they'd been looking for the night show.
Norman Spencer, perhaps.
Norman Spencer,
yes.
Certainly. And I was there at that time, and it was obvious that Graham would be the right one for the job. It became real obvious. A lot of the radio people didn't make it to television. You went the other way, Phil, successful in television and into radio. A lot of the radio people, their head used to bob all over the place, and they didn't have that direct contact with the viewer.
Yes, you're so right. Their eyes sort of were sort of like, zombie-like, weren't they? As far as the camera was
rabbits, some of them.
Yes, they were. But did you have much to do with Graham away from the cameras?
Yes, Mel invited him home for a roast dinner because at that stage he was feeling his way, and at the end of 57 he came in for a roast dinner. He bought his scrapbooks, and he was quite famous with coverage in the press prior to television, and I was amazed at the press that he had prior to television, so he was a natural for it, no doubt about it.
Well, there was press he received by working with Nicky at 3UZ, of course.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Yeah.
And, Nicky was to have done the children's show.
Yes.
And he died just prior to its opening, and there was a mad search to find somebody to work with me, and that's how Happy Hammond came into the spot, and he was brilliant at communicating with the children and adult audience through the television set.
And of course, Happy had been a brekkie announcer here at 3AW, and also replaced Nicky at 3UZ for a time.
That's right, yes, and he did work with Graham Kennedy after that time.
Yeah.
And then you did a stint too, I think, at AK, which was in the building at that time.
Yeah, for Television City. But, okay, so we're talking about the transition period, and do you think Nicky would have been the right man for the children's show, had he lived?
Yes, because I'd worked with him at a lot of town halls around Melbourne where he worked with the children, and he was a very good performer. There was no question in my mind that he was ideal, and when Norm phoned me to get me for 9, he said, "You'll be working with Nicky." I said, how many nights a week? He said, 5. Well, after I picked myself up from the floor, 5 hours, and knew it was with Nicky, I knew I'd be okay.
Yeah,
it was devastating when he died.
Yeah, because he'd done Chatterbox Corner, hadn't he, Simon, with Nancy Lee?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Hugely successful with that. More often than not was voted year in, year out as the most popular performer on radio through his years with Chatterbox Corner and doing Breakfast with Tuppy, yeah.
Yes, and then, of course, Norm Swain as Billy Bouncer was wonderful, too, on radio. It's high pole time. The kids just loved it.
Graham Kenny always was of the opinion that Nicky would not have been a success on television, and this hurt Nancy Lee greatly.
Well, he'd never seen him work as I had to live audiences around Melbourne. Graham would never have been in that scene. So I disagree completely with that. I think he would have been marvellous.
Yes, that might have been professional jealousy, perhaps, Rod.
Possibly so. Who knows? But you were talking about the electronic things nowadays and how people phone up to get numbers, etc. It's surprising how many people say, I've been trying to get in touch with you, I wanted your book, and it never occurs to them to look up the phone book.
Exactly.
So my son, Ron Blaskett Jr., he's got the books, and he's readily available through the phone book, and he has them, of course, available.
And that is, for people who aren't aware, a fabulous book called You, Me and Jerry G, isn't it? Was that the title?
Yes, it's the only one really that covers the history of Victorian television, back to the very start from the test transmissions, and the vaudeville circuits in Melbourne prior to television, and so all that is covered, and fortunately I had all the clippings which are now in the Performing Arts Museum in a great book, and we were able to scan that, and Ron Blaskett Jr. was the one who did tremendous work because he was the creative director with Clemenger Harvey Advertising.
Of course, yes, back in the IMT days. So if we want to purchase a book, we look for Ron Blaskett Jr. in the white pages.
That's right, yes.
It's good that he's carrying on the tradition which he began so many years ago. And you're a very young 90 years of age, Ron.
Yes, well, coming up 91, I'm 90 and a half now.
Yes.
And still got all my facilities, if not my faculties.
I just actually, out in the control room during that last commercial break, I said to Ken, if I had the recall that you have, Ron, I'd be very happy. I'm 41, I'm not even half your age, and I'm as thick as a brick with a shocking memory.
Did you say that you're 40, son?
41, yes.
41, good heavens above. But I must say that I enjoy the warmth of Ken, your producer, and the two of you. It's always a delight for me to speak to you and to your audience because your station has a family feel akin to the early days of Channel 9, and I always feel so comfortable when I'm talking to you. I wish I could have got in there tonight, but that takes a little planning when I move from one place to another.
No, but funny you should say that. I say so often that 3AW reminds me of Channel 9 in the 50s in the days of Sir Arthur Warner.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful feeling there because he was so interested in what was going on.
Sure.
And he was also making $1 selling 17-inch. They said we didn't have colour. We did. We had black and white. Good colours. And Sir Arthur Warner was one of those men you could chat to, and he took such an interest in the station. And his son Graham, I think, was doing a bit of sailing with Rod Kinnear.
Yes.
So it was that wonderful family feel, and thank goodness you've retained that there at your radio station.
Yeah, you know, Ron, it's an Astor. That's the difference.
Yes.
and I must thank you not only for our chat tonight, but many times over the years, but more importantly, for a lifelong friendship.
Thank you very much indeed, Philip and Simon, and your producer Ken. He's always so courteous and makes me feel good before I come on here.
Happy New Year and good health, Ron Blaskett.
All the best to you.
Be watching for the next exciting adventure of Jerry G.